Juste... Midi combien? Midi 45, d'accord. Il faudrait des casques pour les questions, la traduction des questions pour... all of you have a headset for a translation? Okay, they will bring some. 1, 2... You need? Non, ça va? Ah oui, parce que vous comprenez le français. Il y aura du français et de l'anglais. Ok. Merci à tous. Bonjour. So it's going to be an English-speaking discussion, very interesting discussion. Now, we're going to focus on an entirely different region. We're going to focus on Asia and South Asia. You will have to imagine places that you even don't know their name, like Paracel, Scarborough, Shoal, Natuna, Shenkaku, or Diaoyu. Those are small islands, largely inhabited, but they're at the center of the game in this region, which is the place of maybe a future confrontation between the United States and the new large superpower, or pretending to be a superpower, China. And China wants obviously to keep the United States aware of what it considers a region, a strategically important region, the crossroad of most of its imports. It is believed that 80% of China's imports are passing through this South China Sea, and including, of course, energy import. We were talking, maybe you were in the plenary session where we were talking about energy, the importance of energy in the coming years. But it is also the place where approximately $1,200 billion of US trade is also passing. So this is one of the regions, the reason of this growing confrontation. The other one is maybe that it's probably the new center of the world, because it's a region where if there is a nuclear confrontation in the 21st century, maybe it's going to be in this part of the world with, of course, United States and China, two nuclear power, but also North Korea, of course, who is openly threatening the United States. So let me, this is just to present the topic. Let me now introduce you our guests today. Over there, at the far right, we have Robert Kaplan. He's Chief Geopolitical Analyst at Stratfor, and you've been listening to his presentation a little bit earlier this morning. Then we have Mark Fitzpatrick. They're all big specialists of this region of the world. Mark Fitzpatrick, who is Disarmament Non-Proliferation Director at the IISS in London. Then we have from Sweden, Mr. Goran Lennmarker, chairman of SIPRI, which is Swedish International, if you can help me for the rest, Peace Research Institute. Then from Spain we have Rafael Bueno, who is director of Casa Asia, and we have here from United States also Shiroko Goto, which is program associate for Northeast Asia at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Maybe we're going to start with Mr. Kaplan for a short introduction on this subject. I believe that most of you are not very familiar with this part of the world. So maybe Mr. Kaplan is going to explain us why it tends to be so important to look at this growing danger, growing confrontation in this part of the world. Mr. Kaplan, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you. Again, as I said earlier, it's a great privilege to be here today. Capitalism, when it's successful, and it goes on for decade after decade, leads to the acquisition of military power. This is something you normally don't think about, but it's true, because as states become more rich and prosperous, they trade more with the outside world. And as they trade more with the outside world, they have interests that they never had before, and they sometimes seek to protect those interests through the acquisition of navies and air forces, etc. This is exactly what happened to the United States between the end of the Civil War and the outbreak of World War I. The United States developed, its economy grew rapidly in the last third of the 19th century. It acquired a great navy under Teddy Roosevelt, and so what's happening in East Asia is similar in that regard. China is on its way to becoming the world's largest land-based navy. And by land-based, I mean ballistic missiles that are located along the coast on land, but which contribute to naval power. Now, when I say naval power in the Pacific, I mean navies, air forces, cyber warfare, ballistic missiles, none of which can be disaggregated from each other. When you think about why this is happening, why do you read about all these incomprehensible disputes in the South China Sea and the East China Sea? It's mainly because for decades, countries like China, with the Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, were totally preoccupied internally. Vietnam, Malaysia had internal wars and rebellions in the 50s, 60s, and part of the 70s. Again, totally preoccupied internally. Japan was in a state of quasi-pacifism for the decades, a reaction to the fascism of World War II. Again, not projecting power outwards. But lately, in the last few decades, as all these states have congealed institutionally and bureaucratically, they're projecting power outwards, and that leads to territorial disputes in the blue waters. None of this is about ideas. We're not talking about philosophy here, about moral questions. This is all about geography and lines on the map. East Asia is a place where old-fashioned nationalism is very strong. It's not the sectarianism of the Middle East, nor is it the post-nationalism of Europe of the post-World War II decades. It's sort of like the United States in the 1950s. You have real hardcore, many cases, ethnically based nationalism. A word on the South China Sea. When you think of the South China Sea, think of the Caribbean. The greater Caribbean was where the United States became a great power. After it had consolidated its own continent, it kicked the European powers out of the adjacent Caribbean. That gave the United States dominance over the Western Hemisphere, with power to spare to affect the balance of power in the Eastern Hemisphere. That's what the 20th century was all about. Same with the South China Sea vis-a-vis China. The South China Sea is a marginal sea, which is part of a blue water extension of China's continental landmass. And if China can dominate it, or at least have more power in it, it gives China greater leeway in operating in East Asia, and particularly in the Indian Ocean. In other words, what I'm not predicting here is war. Let me end on a positive note. My colleagues can speak more specifically about North Korea, Japan, etc. But at least in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, rather than war, what I see is evidence of a more nervous, crowded world. More crowded with warships, more crowded with fighter jets, with a greater chance of incidents that can happen. But no state in this region, at least as I see it, has has a national self-interest to actually initiate hostilities in any form. So you can have an economic explosion, a social and scientific explosion that is not incompatible with the growth of the numbers of warships in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I'm now going to pass the floor to Mr. Fitzpatrick, who is an expert on disarmament and nuclear proliferation. What are the risks there?
Thank you, Sylvain, and thank you to all of you for coming to this session about a region far away. I thought more of you would go to the Tangier room to talk about a closer region, a war in Mali, an unconventional, small-scale war using small arms. Here I'm going to talk about the potential for a major war, a potential global war, a potential nuclear war. And it's because of one very troublesome country, North Korea. North Korea, one of the impoverished nations of the world, yet it has a nuclear arsenal, both plutonium-based nuclear weapons and highly enriched uranium-based nuclear weapons. Whether they can actually be sent far with their missiles, we don't know, but they're developing various kinds of missiles and testing them. Soon they will have a delivery capability. North Korea also has chemical weapons. After Syria gave up its chemical weapons, North Korea is now the only country in the world that is known to have an active chemical weapons program. It also has potential biological weapons. It is the most militarized country in the world. It spends 22% of its GNP on the military. It has the world's largest special forces. It has the world's fourth largest army, a country that only has 21 million people. It has one of the world's most developed cyber warfare capabilities, a capability it exercises every year against South Korean institutions and government agencies. And North Korea has a propensity to initiate hostilities, as it did in 1950 when it invaded South Korea, and more recently in 2010 when it attacked a South Korean occupied island and a ship killing 52 South Koreans. Be thankful you do not have such a neighbor as North Korea. War could erupt in one of two ways. One way is by escalation of hostilities. North Korea tends to initiate provocations. It might do so again, as it did in 2010. And this time, South Korea will respond in kind. The last time South Korea sat back, worried about war erupting, but they realized that that was a mistake because they lost deterrence. They need to restore their deterrence. So they are determined next time to respond an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This could escalate in ways that are unpredictable. North Korea will not use nuclear weapons early in any conflict. But if a conflict escalates to the point where South Korean forces and American forces cross the border into North Korea, at that point, North Korea might use its nuclear weapons. And before then, it would probably use its chemical weapons. A second way that hostilities could ensue is if North Korea collapses. I hope North Korea will collapse. I think collapse of North Korea is the only way that we will remove nuclear weapons from the Korean Peninsula, because South Korea will unify, and South Korea said they would not keep the nuclear weapons. But a collapse scenario could be very messy, very unpredictable. if North Korea collapses, as Romania did, United States and South Korean forces will try to secure North Korea's nuclear weapons. They'll enter with some special forces to try to secure and capture North Korea's nuclear weapons. China might do the same thing. You might have Americans coming from the south, Chinese coming from the west, and they might meet, and you can imagine a potential for conflict. They need to coordinate in advance for such a scenario, but China is very reluctant to talk about this kind of scenario in advance. They fear that if they talk about it with the United States in advance, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they would give the signal that they have lost faith in North Korea, and this could contribute to a collapse. I don't predict that there will be war in the Korean Peninsula, but I do say that it is possible. It's very possible, and we should be worried about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And I will go to you, Shioko Goto. Okay, there's the confrontation between South Korea and North Korea. And then there's this question of China challenging Japanese sovereignty on these small islands, inhabited islands. Uninhabited islands, sorry. Shinkaku or Daoyu, as whether you're Chinese or Japanese or Chinese. What's the stake there? Is it like Robert Kaplan mentioned earlier, just like old-fashioned nationalism, like Pavlovian reflex, something like that? Or is there an agenda behind that?
Right. Well, before I get into the specifics of the territorial dispute of the East China Sea, I wanted to talk about how fragile and flammable relations are between China, Japan, and South Korea are at the moment. And again, I want to echo Mr. Fitzpatrick's comment that there are a lot of things that we need to be concerned in the world at the moment, and I'm absolutely delighted that we do have a full house here today to talk about Asia. This is our only opportunity during the 4-day forum to discuss the region, and I think the possibility of an outright war is not low. It's actually becoming higher and higher. China is currently the second biggest economy in the world. It overtook Japan about 2 years ago. South Korea is the 15th largest economy in the world. All three countries have had leadership changes over the past 12 months, but there has not been any official diplomatic bilateral relations between the Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, nor has there been a bilateral meeting between Shinzo Abe and the Korean President Park Geun-hye. Now, why is that? Their official argument is that there's a huge disagreement about the perception of history. And what does that mean? There are two issues. One, the Koreans and Chinese remain upset, very upset about Japan's acknowledgement of its wartime atrocities, specifically, particularly about sex slaves, so-called comfort women. That is to say, Asian and Allied women who were forced into prostitution during World War II. The other one is a difference in opinion about ownership of territory, and this is where the islands come in. There are 5 little islets in the East China Sea. Japan calls them Senkaku, China calls them Diaoyu. They are not inhabited. They have no fresh running water. I wish I brought a map here because you cannot even see it on a map.
It's a pity we don't have a map because it's difficult to focus on these problems without a map.
And so there are these little tiny islets, no running water, no nothing. And ostensibly, both sides would argue that there are vast potentials of natural resources under these little rocks. And the UN came up with a report in 1969 saying there is some potential. And natural resources, unlike this region, they're very scarce in East Asia, and any opportunity to tap into that is tremendous. So yes, we could talk about the huge untapped resources and the dispute over resources under these little tiny islets. But what really is at stake is China believes that Japan was able to hold on to these territories illegally, that it was a result of negotiations to end World War II that they were actually not party to, and that Japan and the United States simply decided ownership on their own accord. And China wants to scrap that and say that they want a voice and it belongs to them from a historical perspective. So those are the two things, the sex slavery and the territorial disputes, that are the two things that are preventing these three countries from talking to one another directly. I believe, though, that the reality is that there is a clash of national identities in the region. And it's basically a reflection of a change in the balance of power in the region. Until quite recently, until about a decade ago, it was quite clear that in East Asia, we talked about the economic miracle of the region, this dynamic growth that really propelled income equality, social justice in the region, that led to huge advancements. And Japan was really the leader in this amongst the East Asian countries. That has changed. Japan is no longer number one in the region, it's China. And until about 10 years ago, China really needed Japanese investments to ensure its own economic stability as well. It doesn't really need that anymore, of course it does. Of course it still does need it, but it's more confident in itself, not only as an economic power, but also as a military power. And the time has come now for China to be able to assert itself and say, to revisit history, to reassert its identity, reconsider what it sees as its place in the world. So why should you care? Why should people outside of the Asia-Pacific region care about this change in the balance of power in Asia? I think it really boils down to, what does it mean for the United States? And what does it mean also for US-China relations? The United States is hugely vested in the security of the region. Right now it has two strong alliance systems with alliances with both Japan and with South Korea. When it comes to the territorial disputes, the United States' official position is that it is neutral. It will not go to war over these tiny little islets that no one lives on. But there are lots of ships, lots of boats, lots of airplanes going up above these islands at the moment. And if there are shots, if there is violence to assert ownership of these territories, then the US-Japan alliance would kick in, and it is expected, we think, that the United States would intervene on the behalf of Japan. And that challenges the United States' presence in Asia. And then my final point I want to briefly touch on is, because it is a huge topic, is the United States changing relations with China. One of the most frequent questions I'm asked as a researcher based in Washington is China a friend or a foe to the United States? And the easy answer is, I don't know. The official answer is, no, China is not an enemy. But quite frankly, I don't know what it is. And I think we are trying to figure out a comfortable working relationship between the United States and China, and the situation over the territorial disputes in particular make that relationship between the United States and China particularly vulnerable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Shihoko, for being so genuine. So clearly now there's two ways of seeing this problem. The first one is considering it like China wishing to kick out the United States out of this South China Sea, out of the region, and being the sole superpower in the region. And the other one, as you mentioned, Shihoko, is to say, well, there are occasions after the Second World War, negotiations, treaties, where the Chinese were not part of, and they just want to be included in a new negotiation. They just want to be considered as a major partner because, well, they were sleeping for such a long time, and they're just saying, well, we're back in the game. We're here now with we're the second largest economic power in the world, and we want to be counted on. So I will now pass the floor to Goran Landmarker from Sweden, who is maybe going to, which of this vision will you consider first, Goran?
I would say that East Asia is essentially a question of an enormous success. I mean, the last 30 years in East Asia has been the fastest growing economies, a very rapid social development. It has been peace, unlike in the up to the late 70s. So in that sense, I would say that looking to East Asia, one should be optimistic. Never in human history have we seen so much people being lifted out of poverty than has happened in East Asia. And I think this is important to remember. What is coming in now to some is also a huge part of the globe. 30% of the world's population live in East Asia, the greater East Asia, including ASEAN, East and Southeast Asia. About a quarter of the world economy is there. It's somewhat smaller than Europe still, but it's growing rapidly when it comes to economy. But the population is decreasing as a part of the world population because the birth rates in East Asia are as low as in Europe, which means that it's a decreasing part of the world population-wise, but increasing economic-wise. I think one should remember that. There is one exception, that is North Korea, which is, of course, a totally different thing. I won't go into that, and you explained it, so I won't dwell on that. But I think what is happening now, and I agree to some extent that nationalism is now, in a way, coming in. A bit like Europe happened 100 years ago, when Europe was a success story in the world. Europe grew rapidly, was the leading powers in the world, and nationalism and imperialism was at that time, 100 years ago, growing because you had this feeling that you become strong, you are better than others, and you start even to think that others are worse than you or worse off. There are two things that I think are different now. One is the reason for this rapid growth is that we have an international system that has helped East Asia. If you look at the international economic order, I think that China has benefited most of the international economic order. No other country in the world has ever been able to grow as fast for as long time as China, and thanks to a great deal, of course, first of all to the internal things, the internal changes, absolutely, but also to a very beneficial international system that has helped them throughout these 3.5 decades. And not least, for example, the trade between Japan and China has been extremely important. And they import a lot of, for example, Japanese technique, going up the economic scale from the more advanced countries. But now they are becoming more and more in China, of course, of their own. They have acquired knowledge, they're become a research-based economy more and more. But also then they realize that that will happen, what has happened in Europe, for example, or the United States, that also companies will move out of China to countries with lower economic development, cheaper in a way. So shipbuilding will move to Vietnam, for example, etc. part of the economic logic of development. So I think that for China, now being the number 2 economic country in the world, if you take it country-wise, they are still, as they say themselves, we are only 102 when it comes to the per capita, still a developing country, a long way to become a high-income country. They need to grow for another 3 decades to get a real, should I say, high standard of living comparable to, for example, the United States or Western Europe. So they need still a long way to go, and they are very afraid to come into the middle income trap. We know a lot of countries have grown rapidly up to a certain level, and then they more or less stopped. Latin America being the most obvious example. 50 years ago, Latin America was seen as the growing, perhaps coming up at the same level as the United States and Western Europe or Japan, but they failed. They stopped. And I think the Chinese are very well understanding this. They need to have a rapid economic and not least social development to have internal stability in China, which is a continent more than a country. And another factor is that I think is important. That is the presence of the United States. The United States has a very important presence in East Asia. They have been the security guarantor of East Asia now since the Second World War. And they've been also the security guarantee for China. All this China trade that comes out of China, and you know it well in Morocco as well, that China is a very important trading nation. That has been secured by the freedom of navigation, provided by the presence of the United States Navy, essentially. And to change that system, should one go from a system that had been extremely advantage for China to go to what? As you said initially, there is no other philosophy, there is no other idea of another system like it was when it comes to Soviet Union or China during Mao's time. No. They realize that the system that is there economically is the most advantage for China itself, for its economic and social development. And they have huge challenges in China when it comes to environment, to have the rapid urbanization, all of these problems that all countries go through. I guess Morocco will also go through that, as we have done in my country, for example. I guess every country has to solve its internal problems. And there I think the logic of it will be that we will have a stable East Asia. But there will be a lot of discussion. Nationalism will increase in the media. There will be more debates about it. But I think that in the end, reason will prevail. Why should you give up the golden egg? North Korea is another thing. I just repeat that. North Korea is about the existence of the regime. They understand in North Korea if they open up their borders, the regime will disappear and the country will merge with South Korea. And that is another thing. But they are too small, in essence, to be important in the bigger. North Korea is one of the poorest countries in the world. And particularly is very poor for the families because they devote a lot of their resources to military and things that they shouldn't do, but they do. They even have had famine rather recently when people starve to death, which I think is now more or less unseen in the modern world. So essentially it's a question of success. It's a question about keeping an international economic order that has been extremely favorable to China, but all the countries of East Asia. And also realizing, a bit like we do in Europe, that the presence of the United States is extremely important. It's good for a region, not bad. Thank you.
Thank you, Goran. Now, to close this preliminary remarks, we're going to pass the floor to Rafael Bueno from Casa Asia in Spain, Madrid or Barcelona?
Barcelona.
Barcelona. Okay, and you're going to speak French, I think.
No.
As you want, it's okay. Everyone understands French, as long as everyone has the translation here. Okay. When we were talking together and before the beginning of the session, you were telling me that you're not considering yourself like an expert, but rather like an observer. What did you mean by that?
Well, first of all, bonjour tout le monde. C'est vraiment un plaisir et c'est très stimulant de voir aussi des étudiants. Je viens d'arriver de Barcelone et je ne crois pas qu'on peut avoir un samedi matin aussi des étudiants dans une conférence. Donc, c'est vraiment un plaisir. What I say, when I say I was an observer, I mean I'm coming from not from a think tank, an institution that does public diplomacy for our foreign ministry and also the government of Catalonia and the municipality of Barcelona. And I like to watch, to observe. And so I'm not here as a scholar, but as someone who has to travel to Asia very often and like to see and to talk with the people. I'm going to speak very briefly about North Korea, the unification, as you mentioned earlier, that you were right. I'm going to be also positive, which coming from Spain right now is a little bit contradictory, because as you know, we have a difficult situation in Spain, economic situation, but I'm positive by nature, so I'm going to be positive also about North Korea. I'm going to be very brief because I think it's going to important to have this dialogue with the audience. When we talk about North Korea, we have to consider three elements. One is there is a lack of information. The second one, there is a lot of disinformation. And the third one, there is a lot of manipulation. So when you mix all these elements, it's very difficult to get the right picture of what's going on in North Korea. I have the chance to be there a couple of times, and that's why I'm also optimistic, but I think the problem of unification is far away. First, I think there are also two key elements that we have to consider when we talk about North Korea and South Korea and the unification problem. One is there is a power struggle in North Korea. We have a new regime. We have the grandson of Kim Il-sung, the new leader, a very young guy who is in the 30s. We don't even know the real age of this Kim Jong-un, this person, who is in charge with his uncle and his aunt. And there is this power struggle between the army and the party, the People's Party. And we don't know what's going on really in North Korea in this power struggle. And then we have to consider that in the south, in the other side of the 38 parallel, the South Koreans are not as interested as before about the unification. So probably it makes more complicated this process, because the South Koreans, they don't see the unification of the peninsula as a priority as they did before. And now they want to center in the economic development, and they want to concentrate in their own problems, which are many also. So they don't see the situation in North Korea is a real priority regarding the unification. I say that I'm going to be optimistic because I think that North Korea is really trying to open to the world. They are in this difficult process, especially the new leader Kim Jong-un, to consolidate his power. I mean, his father Kim Jong-il, when his father died before, needed 4 years to consolidate this power, and he's also in this process to see what's going on, and he can has total power, which is going to be very difficult. But when I say that I'm optimistic, I say this because, for example, they just opened a new embassy in Spain, in Madrid. I think they're very interested in, for example, in tourism. They want to open the country to foreign visitors, not only from China. They are also coming from the US, from the European Union. And I think they saw that tourism can be a very good source of income for them, the hard currency, not only selling missiles, ballistic missiles, and fake US dollars, but also they can have good income of money with a good market like tourism. And also we can see the disponibility of the people in power there to have more contact with other countries. They are willing to have, for example, film festivals with from other countries. They are willing to organize football games with other countries, and they are traveling to China very, very often. And when you are living in Pyongyang and you have to go to Beijing, this is a real change. It's like the night and the day. So now they have more information about what's going on outside. And I think it's a matter of time that unification will succeed, and it will be very positive for the whole region, for the peninsula. And well, maybe we have to wait 2 decades, maybe 3, but I think at the end we will see the peninsula again united. And maybe I will leave it here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. So I will say that all of you are moderately optimistic about what's happening in the region. I have a few questions for you before asking the audience. First question, maybe for you, Shihoko, about nationalism between China and Japan, and you mentioned this question of comfort women. We can notice that, if I'm not wrong, there were also this question of comfort women intervene also between South Korea and Japan, and still what we can see between South Korea and Japan is that the power of economic intermediation, the power of trade between the two countries has been more important than historical rift between the two countries. So can we see here another reason to be optimistic on the way that China and Japan relationship are going to evolve in the future?
I think the dichotomy of where China, Japan, South Korea relations are economically and where they are politically is becoming more polarized. When it comes to economic growth, all three actually are quite united in that they remain heavily invested in one another, and certainly Japan benefits greatly from Chinese and Korean capital, and the other way around. China remains heavily dependent on capital flow from Japan. South Korean and Japanese companies do a lot of business together, and their trade balances are extremely important in driving the economy in the region. But at the same time, there's this growth of nationalism that is really becoming stronger and stronger. And when it comes to this issue, for instance, of comfort women, Japan occupied both Korea, the Korean Peninsula, and China during World War II, and the experience was not a good one, to say the least. Japan has actually established a special fund to compensate not just East Asians, but also they committed atrocities all across Asia, in Southeast Asia as well. They've compensated Filipinos, Malaysians, Indonesians. The Koreans at that time were unwilling to accept these funds because it's forced prostitution. They're individual women, and the money was only going to be given to them if they came out and said, I was a prostitute, I was forced into this, and therefore I need money. The women who were victimized didn't want to do that. Now they are. Over the last 10 years, they've actually come out and said, I really want to come out and also be compensated.
But giving money to a prostitute is still prostitution.
No, well, I mean, compensating for... You don't want to make public the fact that this is what you did during the war. This is how you were victimized during the war. So I think any woman here can understand that that is not something you probably want to go
What I
public.
was saying, beside the joke, is that is money the good way of expressing grief and making excuses for how the Japanese behaved in the past?
Is there a good way? Is there an adequate way?
Is money the good way to express
No,
sorrow?
well, money certainly helps. But I think sincerity is the most important thing. And Japan thinks it's been sincere enough and has apologized adequately enough. And the Koreans and Chinese don't think that way. And there is a difference in opinion. But if we go back to the economic issue, these three countries are willing to work together economically. There are some trade negotiations currently underway. One is called the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which actually is US-led. If it goes through at the end of this year as planned, it will represent 40% of the global economy. That's huge. Free trade and 40% of GDP. If this doesn't work through, though, Japan, China, and Korea are also considering other trade agreements. They're considering a trilateral trade agreement. They're considering a trade agreement called RCEP with the ASEAN countries. So there are ways that they are already trying to work together on the economic front. But, as I said at the beginning, they're not willing at the moment to have face-to-face bilateral talks on an official level. At an unofficial level, at the more the second-tier level, they are doing that. Of course, between the foreign ministries, they actually talk. Japan and Korea actually has joint exercises and military stuff. So it's not as if this is a Cold War and they're not actually talking, but it's just a symbolic thing where a leader, a democratically elected leader of Japan or Korea, if they actually are seen talking, it's very bad PR for those two leaders. And that's a problem.
Do you think that we can make an analogy between China, Japan, and South Korea, and what happened in Europe between France and Germany?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the hope had been also that Japan could be like Germany, that there would be an extensive denazification program after World War II, and that Japan would be able to completely renounce its past and think more internationally. I think Japan believes it's doing that. It wants to believe that it is at the forefront of, for instance, being a non-nuclear power, that it has the nuclear capabilities, but it chooses not to use them in a military capacity and simply use them for economic gain. But that's not how it is being perceived. And the reality is that perception is reality, and Japan really needs to do something about changing those perceptions.
And the other thing I was wondering is, to what extent the demonstration that we've been seeing in China against Japanese interest, I remember of Toyota facilities being, torched, etc. To what extent this is accepted by the Communist Party in China, the power in China, as an interior purpose, to calming people or giving them, an exutoire, as we say in French?
You mean like when there was violence in Beijing?
Yeah. To what extent this only thing, this nationalistic rhetoric is done for an interior purpose,
Oh, is Beijing behind it and deliberately manipulating people to be anti?
Yes.
That is certainly the public perception in Japan, that anti-Japanese sentiment is actually government-driven. And that is not making Tokyo happy.
But it's not. It means it's not totally serious too. It's just just politics.
No, I think when you do actually see violence on the streets and damages being done, and businesses actually retreating or trips being canceled, that has a significant impact not just on the immediate economy, but also in public sentiment as well.
Robert?
Yeah, if I could just say a word on that. the Chinese Communist Party is communist in name only. It has no more governing philosophy, so to speak. It's discarded Marxist-Leninism in practice, if not in principle. And so it requires a default philosophy in order to energize the population and to maintain its hold on power. And that default philosophy is becoming nationalism in a very strong, and especially as China goes through an economic transition, which can be very tumultuous, very difficult for its population, the chance of, it's very easy for a regime to dial up nationalism in this regard.
Okay. Gordon?
I think there are two things that are in a way also dampening this. If you travel in China, and as a foreigner you live in hotels, and I would say that in every hotel you go to throughout China, you will find a substantial Japanese presence. Everywhere, everywhere. In small towns, in cities, of course in Beijing and Shanghai and whatever. I mean, the everyday presence of Japan in China is big, huge. If you go to my country, Sweden, Northern Europe, you will find an enormous presence nowadays of Chinese. Every hotel, in the restaurants. The internationalization is enormous in that sense. Most Stockholmers eat sushi for lunch today. You have this internationalization at the elite level, still at the elite level. Certainly, but nevertheless, I think one should never forget that. That is an essential part. And of course, the elite, a government is usually composed of elites. They understand that this international cooperation and exchange is really important. Could I also add that the militarization of East Asia is rapid in the sense that they are growing rapidly economically, but still, the combined military spending of East Asia is not higher than the combined military spending of Western Europe, EU, NATO, West Europe. It's on the same level. So one must remember that the starting point was, so to say, low, much less than the United States, both of us, of course, much, much less than half.
I'd like to hear from other panelists. Yes, just Raphael, yeah.
Just very brief, I completely agree that nationalism has replaced ideology in China, but we have to remember also that the Japanese, the Koreans in both sides are also very nationalist. So it's something that is going to create a clash.
Okay, nationalism is one thing, but one of the things I retained from your presentation, Goran, is that you, if I'm not wrong, you was just hinting that maybe we're all exaggerating a little bit the power of China in terms of, when we say it's the second larger economic power, but per capita, it's not the same thing just because of this huge problem that Chinese as a continent, etc. So I'd like to hear from the other panelists on that. Are we, what do you have to say on that? Are we exaggerating the power or the influence of China? Robert and then
Here's how I would put it. First of all, China will get old before it gets rich. It will have an aging population before it has a really robust European-level middle-class population. On the other hand, simply because of its mass of 1.3 billion people, added to its military power, which only 2% of the Chinese budget goes to the military, but because the budget is so big, that makes China, as I said earlier, building the world's largest land-based navy with over 60 nuclear-powered and diesel-electric submarines, and I can go on and on and on with statistics like that. So military power plus demographic power plus geographical centrality to the Asia-Pacific region adds up to a totality of Chinese power that the United States needs to accommodate to some level. The debate in the Pentagon is not about kicking the Chinese out. It's about to what degree does the United States Navy and Air Force accommodate the growth of Chinese power. And in this sense, the United States has to steer between two parameters. On the one hand, it cannot let China dominate the South China Sea and East China Sea. That would lead to a kind of Finlandization of Vietnam, Malaysia, the Philippines, etc. But on the other hand, the United States cannot let these other countries drag it into a conflict with China, because the United States has too many other equities with China. Trade, currency, environment, you name it.
Mark?
Robert mentioned the centrality of geography. And you look at China, it has difficult relations with almost every one of its neighbors. It has a land dispute with India that is intensifying. Vietnam is terrified of China. China is bullying the Philippines. China is making more demands against the Senkaku Islands, as Shihoko pointed out. China and Russia have a huge border, which is peaceful, but they have had disputes in the past. And one of the reasons that Russia is reluctant to reduce its nuclear arsenal is because it sees a potential Chinese second front enemy. It wants to retain nuclear weapons to be used in a potential exchange with China. So there are many ways that China presents difficulties that are unrelated to its per capita income, but that are related to its centrality of it, to its geography, to its nationalism, and to its still, I would say, developing sense of how to deal peacefully with neighbors. It's getting better in the last couple of years, but it has been exhibiting behavior that is not so friendly in the eyes of many of its neighbors.
So that's an element of response. Shihoko was just saying genuinely that in the United States there's no answer, no real answer to the question, is China a friend or a foe? But as you mentioned, in the region, no one considers China as a friend. That's what you've been saying.
And I feel sorry for the Chinese, actually. Look at, China has two friends, two allies, Pakistan and North Korea, two failing states. United States has Japan, Singapore, India, even now Myanmar. The balance is huge. China doesn't have very many friends, unfortunately.
Shihoko?
This is so anecdotal, but one of the things that, before I get to the anecdote, let me clarify. China is a military power. It is an economic power. It also wants to wield what's called soft power. And for those of you who didn't do political science, soft power is really winning hearts and minds. And as Mark said, they're not doing a very good job, but they're trying really, really hard. One of the ways they're doing that is coming up with things like the Chinese dream. They want to appeal to both within China and outside of China about talking about this is what China aspires to, and you, the Chinese people, and everyone else should really buy into this idea of a Chinese dream, that we are going places. Secondly, they've invested a tremendous amount on media, most notably CCTV, but other media outlets, such as People's Daily. We see that in the Middle East. We see Al Jazeera being the forefront of really coming out and trying to push its own viewpoint. But it's not terribly successful. And my anecdote right now is going to be about the aid efforts that are going into hurricane relief in the Philippines from Haiyan. And China initially committed $100,000 for relief, and that apparently is less than what IKEA gave. That's not good. So it has stepped up to boost aid to 1.6 million, but compare that to Australia with 28 million, the United States with 20 million, Japan with 10 million. It is not putting a lot of money or effort into international efforts, which is really what I believe it should be doing at the moment. And it's only once you take on international responsibilities, like going beyond your own national borders and thinking about solutions to climate change or to environmental security, or talking about issues like gender equality and embracing it and trying to be a world leader in things, issues of international interest, it is not doing a very good job of that. And once it starts taking on those responsibilities, I think it will be doing a better job of winning friends.
Just one thing, I don't see what's the Chinese dream. And talking about soft power, working for a broadcasting company, France 24, a French broadcasting, international broadcasting company, I see a lot of interest for the American point of view, for example, Hollywood, Apple, Steve Jobs, etc., big interest for American point of view. I see sometimes interest for a French point of view, European point of view. I don't see an interest for a Chinese point of view, in terms of culture, in terms of, I don't see that.
I think the idea of the Chinese dream is still a bit evasive but it does also mean something that is an alternative to the American very individualistic market economy driven kind of model, where it's more of a collective, that it does actually look out for the community and it looks to see societal gains as opposed to individual gains. That's my understanding of it. In terms of aspirational China, yes, there is no kind of commercial. The commercial aspiration of China is perhaps still. It isn't perhaps. It is lagging compared to most industrialized countries. But that is what they are aspiring to. That they are trying to make the China brand not about cheap stuff, but something that is desirable because it is of China.
Robert.
Yeah. Just to pick up on that, is that, remember, China for centuries was the central dispatch point for a tribute system throughout East Asia, which was far more peaceful than the balance of power system in Europe in the time, in the early modern history. Then China, after being a great world civilization, went through about 175 years of internal disarray, warlordism, humiliation by the Western powers in the late 19th and early 20th century. So I think what China wants is several things. It wants back Taiwan. It wants to dominate the South China Sea because it wants to erase this almost 2 centuries of national humiliation. And also it wants a high standard of living for its people, which is why its foreign policy is essentially a resource acquisition policy, looking for energy and minerals and strategic metals wherever and wherever they can find it, in order to lift hundreds of millions of people into some semblance of the middle class. And I think finally is to say that China believes that Western democracy is not the last word in human political development, that there's something analogous to it, a variation to it, that China can help demonstrate.
Rafael?
Yes. Well, you asked about about China, and we are talking only about China, not Korea or South China Sea. One thing that Mark said is I disagree that North Korea is a good friend of China. I think the Chinese lost face with China. They are very angry with them, and the North Koreans, they feel betrayed by the Chinese, so the relation is not good. And I think China has a new friend, and it's the European Union. So they are not alone. They have a strategic partnership with several countries, France, Spain, UK, I think Germany. And I think the European Union is really eager to make this relationship with China work, and they are eager to go forward. So I don't think that China is alone. And well, we keep talking about China, I think, because China is going to be, with the United States, the center of the world.
Well, one thing is to have a strategic partnership, and the other thing is not fearing this partner. I don't know. I don't feel that Europe is really comfortable with China. There's a lot of,
well, I think that we don't feel uncomfortable with China. You know, we need the Chinese
of course.
for the development of our economy. We are now hoping that we will have more and more Chinese tourists.
But take, for example, human rights question, for example.
Yeah,
it's coming all the time that the Chinese leader is coming to France, to Great Britain, to Germany, etc. This question of human rights is raising, and there's always, it's not like, it's not like we can compare. We're strangers to one another. See what I mean?
Yes, we are really far away, but I think the world has globalized so much and is now interconnected. And I mean, you can go from Paris to Beijing in 10 hours, so it's not like before. And we need to collaborate, so I think it's going to be very interesting.
I have one more question, maybe for Mark Fitzpatrick or Robert Kaplan. Can we dissociate the question of nuclear proliferation in North Korea from the question of proliferation in Iran, for example? Is there two totally disconnected question or not?
They are connected. They are connected, certainly, but they're very different. North Korea is watching how the world reacts to Iran. Iran is watching how the world treated North Korea. Some people say that Iran learned a lesson, that the United States attacked Iraq when they didn't have nuclear weapons, and attacked Libya when they didn't have nuclear weapons, but did not attack North Korea because they had nuclear weapons. This is a lesson, some people say, Iran learned. I disagree. The United States did not attack North Korea for 30, 40, 50 years. Whether they had nuclear weapons or no nuclear weapons, they never attacked because they never wanted to restart the Korean War, because Seoul, the capital of South Korea, is so close to the border that any war would devastate the capital. And the South Koreans did not want to see this happen. So the key point, the key difference between the Iran situation and the North Korea situation is that in Northeast Asia, America's principal ally, South Korea, does not want an attack on North Korea. Compare it to Iran. America's principal allies, Israel and Saudi Arabia, actually would like an attack on Iran. That's why the situation is very difficult, very different.
Robert?
Yes, just to point out, North Korea is a very weak, embattled, semi-state country in a state of quasi-starvation much of the time. It has only 21 million people, whereas Iran is a country of 70 million people with a much higher standard of living, with influence from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to central Afghanistan. It has a lot of things going for it beyond a nuclear program that North Korea does not. And in fact, I would say that Iran has a much better relationship with the United States today than North Korea ever had. There are discussions all the time now between Iranian and American officials. That's not the case with North Korea.
Okay, thank you all. I think we're going to leave it there. And we've not been talking much of Vietnam and not at all about Taiwan, which means that we could have talked this question for hours. Maybe we're going to take a few questions.
Hello everybody, my name is Sulaiman Gigi and I am a student at the School of Governance and Economics of Rabat. So actually I have a question to Mr. Bueno. You were talking about a country in Asia which is willing to cooperate with other countries in order, like for example, in movies, and you were talking about China, is that right? Or that was North Korea?
It was North Korea.
Okay, North Korea. So as far as I understood, North Korea today is willing to cooperate with other countries in order to make good relations with those countries. So do you believe that North Korea today, the way how you describe it, we could see that you're making of North Korea kind of a victim of a situation. Do you think that North Korea today is kind of receiving or the victim of a instrumentalization from the United States, or would say the Western countries, which have totally interests and gain from the situation in East Asia, I mean, which gain from the disputes between North and South Korea, and would like to make this statu quo more durable and stays the thing that it is. So is that the point you're raising, and do you think it's really a victim of an instrument?
Well, I think thank you for your question. I think the real victim in North Korea is the people of North Korea, and they are victim of his own government. That's the key. It's the problem with North Korea is this family, the Kim family, who has been running North Korea for more than 6 decades, and people are suffering. They are starving. They were starving. I think it's the only industrialized country that has suffered famine in the world. So this is unusual. The size of the population has decreased. Also, this is unusual. I think by the standard, North Koreans are like 8 centimeters smaller than the South Koreans, and the people responsible for this is the Kim family. When I say they try to open to the outside world, it's because they are really trying to open. They are doing slowly because the main goal is the survival of the regime. The people, the elite that is ruling the country, of course they have a lot of privilege. They don't want to lose this privilege, and that's the main goal for them. But they try to open the country really slowly. When I say also previously that they have bad relations with China, I remember Deng Xiaoping in the 90s, after he opened up the country in the beginning of the 80s, they tried to convince Kim Il-sung to follow the Chinese path, and he couldn't. And they have been acting by themselves for so many years. And the Chinese, they are very angry because of this. They didn't want to follow the Chinese path of development. And now they really feel alone with no allies at all, because the Chinese, they don't want to avoid the collapse of North Korea. And they are looking to everywhere. You know, they are sending doctors to Europe because they have big problems with pediatrics in the hospital. They are sending professors to Europe also to learn the language and to open to the outside world. And I mean, I tried to organize a football game. I went to Pyongyang I negotiate with them to organize a football game, female football game, because North Koreans, the female under 17, they were the world champions. They defeated the Americans in the World Cup. And it took almost 1 year to organize this football game between Spain and North Korea. And at the end, we have to cancel because they wanted to do it during summer when we were having holidays. So we say, sorry, we cannot do it during summer. So, I mean, they are willing to really to do many things. But we have to keep in mind that they have a terrible regime, and they are still with the proliferation. They're still developing their nuclear programs. This is another part of the coin.
Who's got the mic? Yeah.
Thank you. I come from China and work for the China-Africa Development Fund. I have the question to Haut. Talking about the conflict between China and Japan about the island. In your opinion, do you think there will be a war happens over there? And if so, which one will be the most profitable country? Secondly, as global investors from China, what do you think it will be affect the investor environment around China and among the China investors? What will be the effect? Thank you very much.
Your first question is about the possibility of war between Japan and China?
Yeah, and
Okay.
if there's a war, who will be the most profitable country around the world from the war?
Who would profit?
Yeah, who will get the most profit from the war if in your opinion, that war
Okay.
happens?
I hope, my hope is that both Japan and China are in agreement that war is not the answer. But here's what I'm fearful of. I'm afraid of the salami tactic. What does that mean? That we go slice by slice. Right now, the area around these islets are very tense. There are planes, ships, boats everywhere. Both are aiming at the other. One mistake by one guy who acts not from Beijing's order, but from his own, and they're usually guys, their own incentive. One mistake could trigger a whole domino effect of miscalculations, misunderstandings, misfired shots. One shot could be perhaps a repeat of what happened in World War I, where shooting someone, killing some high rank, in the case of World War I, it was the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, Serbia, and then Austria-Hungary, sorry, and then and it leads to a kick-in of alliance systems. Now, the alliance system in this is Japan, if it retaliates against China because it was hit, then its understanding is that the United States will back it, and that it has the backing of the US government to go on the offensive against China. And this is a very dangerous situation. So there is no clear red line at the moment, where there is no clear guidance as to when that US-Japan alliance may kick in against China. So I hope that there will not be any shots fired. And whilst my best case scenario, which is probably an impossible scenario, is for joint development of these islets, the most likely best case scenario is going to be that tensions just simmer down, this becomes a non-issue, and we just let it die, and people just go back home. And so...
But no one is renouncing to...
No, so it just kind of peters out. And your second question about investors, and I'm not really, I didn't really understand.
Yeah. Can you reformulate your question, excuse me?
As a global investor...
The second question.
The second question, yes. I'm from the China and Africa
A
Development...
little bit louder, because we have difficulties to hear.
Okay. I'm from the China and Africa Development Fund, which is global investors from China. And my question is, what's your opinion about the conflict affect the investment environment among China about our global investment?
Right, okay, so for instance, in the Africa region, I believe China is one of the biggest investors in Africa at the moment. And in certain areas, it is the single biggest investor in resources. Japan has actually stepped up efforts to invest in Africa too. So you can see this as a conflict between the two countries for a 21st century version of a scramble for Africa that was seen in the 19th century amongst European nations. There is a different style between Japanese and Chinese companies investing in Africa. The Japanese are more willing to work together. This is the perception, that the Japanese companies are more willing to work with their African counterparts and to encourage technology transfer. Whereas the fear is that China is less willing to work closely with local partners in that they bring all their workers from the lowest worker to the highest ranking member, all from mainland China, and they establish communities there without really leading to any benefit to the local community. And I think that if that is the case, then I think that is not a sustainable way for China to continue investing.
Yes, Goran, you want to say something?
First, a point of fact, there are contacts, though, between Japan and China to find mechanisms to avoid a war by mistake. For example, people from the coast guards on both sides meet and discuss, so we avoid the situation that was during the Cold War in Europe, that by mistake you start a war. And I think that is very encouraging. When it comes to China in Africa, I think the important thing is for China not to repeat the European mistakes we did in Africa for a century. I mean, exploiting, but to be a true partner. And I think that is important to listen to the Africans themselves, because they are the ones to decide how the Chinese engagement in Africa is.
Who's got the microphone? We have one there, and there was, yeah. Maybe this side to change, yeah, there was... first row, yes. Maybe we're going to group the question.
Hi, I'm a sociology student from the School of Government and Economy of Rabat. Well, on her speech during the South Korean Independence Day a few months ago, President Park speaks about Japanese behavior in the past. My question is, don't you think that it's time for Chinese, Japanese, and South Korean diplomacy to give up their historical conflicts and collaborate together in order to solve the security issues of the region? And China as a global economic power, Japan with the higher technology development, and South Korea as the second faster country in the term of development after Israel, as it's considered by a lot of experts, wouldn't be benefit to those three powers to make more efforts for political stability and even an union, maybe? Thank you.
We're going to take a question over there. There was, yes. Second row.
Hi, my name is Bouteina. I'm a student at ISCAO Casablanca. So my question for you is about North Korea. I mean, you have said that it is considered to be a threat not only for the Asia-Pacific region, but also for the world. So why aren't we doing... Yeah, okay, sorry. So why aren't we doing something about it right now? Why isn't the military intervention an option? I mean, wouldn't it be more dangerous to let things the way they are right now? I mean, they are getting stronger. Thank you.
Okay, and last one there, yeah. And then we'll go this way, okay.
Hello, my name is Nassima Ajijin. I'm from Institut, the Institut supérieur de commerce et d'administration des entreprises à Casablanca. Well, my question will be about the North Korean country also. When Mr. Bueno saying that North Korean people are interested in other countries and getting more and more open about what's going on elsewhere, wouldn't be a threat for the country that the people would be aware of about what is going on and how people live elsewhere. So there is a threat of social revolution maybe in the country. So would it be the end of the Kim government if the people do this revolution and stand for their own interests? And thank you.
Okay, so a lot of questions about North Korea. Who wants to answer? Yeah, Mark.
Let me address the second and third questions, which are very related. Why doesn't the world do more about the North Korean threat? The world has been trying many policy options, sanctions, engagement, 6-party talks, 5-party talks, 4-party talks, 8-party talks, every possible policy option. But the option that I think will work the best is the option pointed out by the next questioner, who spoke about the information flow into North Korea. As more and more people in North Korea learn about their stage of development being so far below their neighbors, as they learn about the contradictions in their economy and their philosophy, I think the potential for a change will become greater and greater. And I think that is probably the best hope. As Raphael said, it might not be tomorrow or next year, it might take a decade or more, but eventually I think this is the best answer.
Yes, Robert?
Yes. Keep in mind that more and more North Koreans have access to shortwave radios, and while the internet is available only to the regime, more and more of these are being smuggled into North Korea, memory sticks, to use on computers. So little by little, the outside world is penetrating North Korea. But keep one thing in mind. We've seen in divided country scenarios in the 20th century, East-West Germany, North-South Yemen, North-South Vietnam, that when reunification happens, it tends to happen in a very tumultuous, unpredictable, fast-moving pace that can take days or weeks rather than the years that all the experts had predicted. So that the North Korean crisis or implosion could come at us at any time and be very unpredictable when it does, and that would necessitate the mother of all humanitarian interventions. Because you could have, on Monday, you could have the North Korean people, 21 million people, under the responsibility of Kim Jong-un, and on Wednesday, under the responsibility of the U.S. Pacific Command and the Chinese People's Liberation Army. So this is a really, really this is a situation with really wide-ranging impact, where a few weeks of diplomacy and troop insursions could affect the balance of power in Northeast Asia for years afterwards.
I think that maybe we have already answered the first question, but Shihiko, do you want to say something?
I just want to say, pride in history is a double-edged sword, and I think no one probably understands that more than people in the Middle East. That it is a good thing to understand one's past, but when it's manipulated for political gain, it can be a dangerous tool. And I think that's what's happening at the moment. And I agree that with you that there needs to be more dialogue and there needs to be more openness to do these things. But as I said, we're not prepared to do that at the highest level at the moment.
Okay, sir. We're going to take the last few questions.
Hello, geopolitics and security and defense law.
A little bit louder, please.
Geopolitics, security and defense program at the University of Ujda, the law school. First of all, thanks to the Amadeus Institute for really the broad theme, which is what emerges in an unstable world. I think for now, which had become something traditional, only pessimistic scenarios have been laid down. But let's make it fun. And I'm addressing the question to my friend from Kaplan. Can you please tell us who is the evil in that area? Because we see that each time,
I think it was
China.
pretty clear, no?
Who is it?
I think it was pretty clear it was North Korea. There was one, you know?
Well, the big brother there is China. He's not going to allow anybody to
He's a small Satan.
Yeah, he's not going to allow anybody to come closer. So in America, we're not allowed a war to be launched until the big boots will say, okay, play a bit. So who's the evil? Second question to my friends from the IRS, right, in England. So you raised the case we need to take the weapon of mass destruction or nuclear weapons from Korea. We will be very glad if your think tank can tell us how, because I don't know, until now we don't know exactly where they are, in which spot. For my friend, Swedish guy.
No, that's enough, I think.
These are comments that because thank you for all the think tanks here. Thank you for Brahim, because he allowed us to have all this.
Okay, we have to be,
okay, IRS, Cypri instead. We have been there last year, and we asked a guy there, I think you guys, you Swedish guys, are known for your diplomacy. You have done a very great job in South America. Your ambassador did something great.
Can you answer your question, please?
Okay.
Yeah, please.
Why couldn't you pinpoint the weapons or the bullets as weapon of mass destructions? Para mi hermano Rafael, ayer.
No, okay, we're gonna leave it there. Excuse me, there's a lot of other people.
I'm going to complain.
No, it's okay. Thank you. No, please, thank you. There's a lot of people wanting to ask questions, and we have only 5 minutes left.
Thank you, please. Thank you. The Moroccan Sahara. This thing,
no one has to monopolize the. No. No one will monopolize. No, please.
This things with the Moroccan Sahara.
I said stop. Can you understand?
This thing with the Moroccan Sahara.
Please stop. I ask you to stop. There's other people wishing to ask questions. Please.
Okay, I'll ask you the question about the Moroccan Sahara.
Can you please stop? Am I clear?
Merci.
Yes, merci. There's other people wishing to ask questions. Please.
Good morning.
Yes, one question, please.
Yes. In fact, I will be more comfortable on speaking French, so with your permission, can I switch en French to ask my question? En effet, depuis votre différentes interventions, j'ai l'impression qu'il y a une question qui n'a pas été posée. Ce qui pousse la Chine à changer sa posture maintenant. En fait, je suis d'accord avec vous que la Chine a le pays qui a plus profité des termes de l'actuel ordre mondial. Mais elle s'est rendue compte quand elle a eu la taille du lion qu'elle a été trop étouffée côté régional. Des pays qui sont plutôt capitalistes l'entourent. Et le danger commence à être à l'intérieur de la Chine, avec l'émergence d'une classe moyenne, plus ou moins avec un style européen que Chinese. Est-ce que la Chine veut maintenant changer l'actuel ordre mondial, ou elle veut mettre des nouveaux termes sur un nouveau ordre mondial, et elle commence cela par l'implantation en Chine? Parce que l'implantation en Chine, l'implantation en Afrique de la Chine n'est pas seulement économique, mais aussi culturelle et sociale.
Merci pour votre question. Une dernière question. Voilà, madame là-bas. Je suis désolé, il va falloir qu'on en reste là. Il sera l'heure de conclure.
Hi, my name is Nisha Park. I'm from South Korea, and I'm an exchange student of Art Archive. I want to ask Mr. Mark, and Mr. Mark Pyle, and Mr. Corinne, in your opinion, what can be the trigger of unification between North Korea and South Korea? And also, do you believe the internal crisis in North Korea is the best way to have unification between Korean Peninsula? Thank you.
Okay. Robert and Mark had questions from this part of the...
Yes, what I would say is China is not the evil in this regard at all. China is rising as a great power in the typical tradition of other great powers throughout history. It's rising organically. It's developed an economy for decades before it started to grow militarily as a reaction to its economic expansion. It's not threatening to wipe any particular country off the map or anything, but the rise of new great powers has always upset the international system throughout history. And that is, you know, and that is what's going on in Asia. If you had to simplify what is causing instability in the Indo-Pacific today, it would be the rise of Chinese total power, you know, geographic, economic, and military, and how the region accommodates that.
Okay, and maybe you can address the question of, is there, the question was asked in French, whether or not it was the question of the agenda. I asked the question before. Does China has an agenda of a new world order, or is it just, you know, nationalistic, you know, old-fashioned nationalism, as you said before?
I don't think that China does have a well-articulated agenda for a new world order. Just look at its foreign policy. As I said earlier, China's foreign policy is essentially a resource acquisition policy. It's dealing with regimes, whether in Africa, anywhere, that can supply China with energy, minerals, or metals. It's why China is doing everything it can to develop port projects in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, in order to get energy to China. And you know, why is China building pipelines and railroads throughout Central Asia and across north-central Myanmar? It's to get energy into China without having to rely on the very narrow Strait of Malacca. China doesn't really have a philosophy of ideas in its foreign policy. It's to free ride off the international system up to the point where it can't anymore, and meanwhile acquire more and more natural resources.
And then to finish with, if I understood well, there's the question from the person from South Korea, yes, of the feasibility of the reunification of the two Koreas.
Let me also address the question by the gentleman in front. He's correct. Who knows where the nuclear weapons are? My scenario is that in a collapse situation, various generals will be competing for the most precious resources of North Korea. Those are the nuclear weapons. And as they compete for those resources, the whereabouts will become known. And the United States will then implement the war plan that they have been practicing to seize them. It will be very messy. And to address the young lady's question, of course, fighting is the worst possible way to bring about unification. I think it's the most likely, but there could be other ways. The best way would be integration of the two economies through operations like the Kaesong Industrial Zone, teaching North Koreans about market economies and working together. Unfortunately, North Korea has been so stubborn about the Kaesong Industrial Complex, shutting it all down at a whim. You know, a gradual process, of course, would be the best way. But we don't know when it will happen. It could happen, as Robert said, overnight because of internal dynamics over which none of us have any control.
Okay, I think we're going to leave it here. Thank you, all of you, for this fascinating discussion. Thank you, of course, to the Amadeus Institute. And thank you, all of you, for being so numerous and here this morning. Thank you. Good afternoon.